Hi, I'm Laura, and I'm 18. Tell me, does your boyfriend have habits that piss you off? Watch my story till the end and find out how I got involved with a guy who constantly makes nasty noises. I always had troubles with guys at school. Actually, I've just never had a boyfriend because I had other things to do than chase guys, like going to college. What guys? But I got involved in a stupid bet. My besties made a bet that each of us would come to the next party with a guy, and I agreed just to keep up. It seemed like there was a lot of time before the party, and then there was only a week left. And as before, I had no boyfriend. I took a train to my hometown and felt disheartened. We put money on the bet. The amount wasn't big, but I still didn't want to lose. Okay, what if we imagine for a moment that I backed out of the bet? It was so embarrassing. Was I really so pathetic that I couldn't even find some loser to go on a single date? As luck would have it, a handsome, fit guy with a brilliant smile sat in front of me. He was eating chips, and I was too embarrassed to look at him. Then, it dawned on me. I have a cousin the same age as me, a relative distant enough that I definitely hadn't mentioned him in front of my friends. What if he could help me? I wrote him a message saying, "Meet me at our place. Hurry up, there is money involved." I mentioned that to be sure that he'd answer. And suddenly, I heard a disgusting sound. It turned out that the guy in front of me finished his chips and suddenly burped. I tried to pretend that I didn't notice that, but he continued to make burp noises, and then he gazed at me. Have you ever received attention from someone totally disgusting? The guy walked over to me. I smiled tightly, moved away, and pretended to have a keen interest in the landscape outside the window, and hoped that he would get the hint. I received the SMS at the same time as the guy burped again. I opened it and groaned out loud. My cousin was out of town for the whole weekend. The vile sounds that the guy was making suddenly began to not seem so vile. I looked at him appraisingly. He smiled in response, clearly deciding that I was flirting. But what should I have done? It was a desperate situation. I started making eyes at him. He was the first to start the conversation by asking, "Where are you going?" That's how we got acquainted. His name was Matt, and apparently being too happy made his disgusting sounds even louder. At the nearest station, I went out to get some air and call Ellie, but Matt followed me. At first, we were even flirting, but Matt could not contain his urge and burped when the guard was passing by. The guard turned around with such a stupid face that I burst out laughing and couldn't stop. Then Matt burped again. The guard asked to me. I thought we'd better stop, but as luck would have it, I just laughed harder. The guard frowned and walked towards us. Then Matt screamed, "Let's run!" And we ran away. What a nonsense! I should have said immediately that I wasn't with this idiot and calmly leave. And while we were hiding, the train had already gone. What was I supposed to do then? Matt asked why I was so worried, and I told him the whole truth about the party, the stupid bet, and that I was ready to invite him with me, but we wouldn't get anywhere now. Having said that, I got pretty embarrassed because I really liked Matt when he wasn't burping. Well, Matt replied that in that case, getting to the party was a matter of honor, and we would go there by bus, and that he would pay for the tickets. We found a bus station, and quickly things began to get better, which meant that I had the opportunity to think about what would come next. I colorfully imagined how I would appear at the party with Matt. It turned out beautiful and exciting. Then, it was embarrassing and unpleasant. When we were buying tickets, Matt stopped making those sounds. But then, when we took our seats, he started burping again. The passengers began to turn around, and someone even made a remark. But Matt just grinned back. The longer the ride was, the louder the disgruntled passengers were. Even the driver began to glance at us unpleasantly. But Matt didn't seem to care. I poked Matt in the ribs a couple of times, trying to shut him up. But that made him burp more, with a story with a guard in mind. I tried to pretend that I wasn't with Matt and that I was a victim like everyone else on the bus. But the passengers weren't convinced. Soon, they started reproaching me, telling me to shut my boyfriend up. And when a woman even yelled at me, Matt unexpectedly and rudely shut her up, ordering her not to speak to his girlfriend in that tone. The woman said that he was not the one to be talking to her about manners. After discussing for so long, the driver stopped the bus an hour's walk from the nearest stop and told all the dissatisfied passengers to get off there. Of course, everyone considered us to be the dissatisfied passengers. I didn't know what to do. It was disgusting to be with Matt, but without him, I wouldn't have ever reached the town. Matt, as if he was not a bit upset, offered to go hitchhiking. He stood by the curb and boldly raised his hand. We caught the first car quickly, but Matt burped a couple of times, and the driver asked us to get out, being afraid that next, Matt would be vomiting in the car. In order not to waste time, we continued the rest of the way on foot. Sometimes Matt would burp again, and every time I didn't know whether I should get angry or burst out laughing. What would you do if you were me? Despite all his disadvantages, Matt was a pretty nice guy. He noticed that I was tired of the long walk, and when we got to the nearest gas station, he offered to take a break and even laid his jacket on the border so that I could sit down and not get my dress dirty. He left me to go and do something. I didn't want to think about that as he had already done enough nasty things before. I texted Ellie a couple of messages saying that I was on my way with a boyfriend and I'd probably be late but definitely will come. And I thought the situation started to get funny as it turned into a surprise for my friend. Cheered up, I went to look for Matt. Suddenly, I heard his voice. He was standing around the corner. I heard that Matt was talking to someone on the phone. I only heard, "Yeah, she's with me." And literally a second later, Matt hid his phone in a pocket and came towards me. He had a bag of chips with him. So cute. He bought me a snack. But who was he talking to? And about whom? Was that conversation about me? I felt uncomfortable, and that nice guy Matt began to seem suspicious, as if he had come straight from a thriller. What if he deliberately prevented me from getting to the city? Who knew what was in that bag of chips? I asked him if he wanted to split the snack with me, and Matt said he couldn't. On the train, he ate the whole bag of chips. So, I threw away the gift just in case. Fortunately, Matt quickly found a man who was prepared to give us a lift to the city. The old man was very kind, and most importantly, he was almost deaf and didn't even hear Matt's burping, which continued as soon as we sat in the car. And then, having gone through the hell of the countryside highways, we returned to civilization. I couldn't stop thinking about the conversation at the gas station. I thought about trying to throw Matt off on my way, but he stuck to me and even found the road to Ellie's place faster than I figured it out on the city transport map. Nervously, I asked if he had any other plans for the evening, and he confidently replied that he cleared his entire schedule specifically to be my boyfriend today. Well, why not take him with me? If he really was some kind of maniac, I'd better find it out around my friends who would be ready to protect me. But when we entered my friend's house, I stopped being afraid that Matt would drag me into an alley and kill me, and I began to fear that he would burp in front of everyone. And it happened. Matt opened his mouth wide like a whale and made such a strong and disgusting sound that all the guests turned to us. I was ready to sink into the ground or escape back onto the highway or anything. And then Ellie came up to us and loudly slapped Matt on his shoulder. "Your pancreas again, goof?" she asked almost gently. And Matt embarrassedly scratched the back of his head and said, "Yes, I ate a bag of chips before the trip." I froze with an open mouth, and Ellie, laughing, explained that Matt was her cousin, and when she found out that we were going to be on the same train, she deliberately asked him to look after me and maybe to get acquainted so that I wouldn't be embarrassed to show up without a boyfriend. I was about to feel offended, but I remembered that I myself was about to involve my cousin in this, so I said, "Okay." And Matt, chuckling, added that I had an angelic patience and he thought that his burping that suddenly attacked him would scare me away. I replied, What girl would leave a guy just because of a couple of disgusting sounds? And then, we went to dance. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new videos.